the ego. The ego is something that a lot of people mention in spirituality, but don't really dissect and really understand. And it's important to understand the ego because the ego plays a big part in our spiritual evolution, especially here on this planet, Earth, this physical realm. So what I want you to understand about the ego mainly is that when we talk about things like an ego death, and though when people talk about the ego death, it's in a way that I don't necessarily agree with because one, you cannot kill the ego. The ego is not going anywhere. The ego is a part of the contrast of you. Okay. The ego is the other side of consciousness. Okay. So when we think about the ego, we must also look at it as like I said, the other side of consciousness. Some people would say the dark side of consciousness, and the dark side isn't really talking about it in terms of it being bad, right? Even though that can be categorized as the bad side, right? But it's important to recognize that light and darkness need each other. Without one, there cannot be another. Without darkness, we cannot acknowledge light. Without light, we cannot acknowledge darkness. The same thing can be said about good and evil. Okay? It's just two sides of the same coin, two sides of the spectrum, two extremes. The mastery of spirituality is not leaning toward one or the other, but staying in the line, being balanced, recognizing the importance of both. So when we talk about the ego death, I really want you to understand that we're not really talking about the ego itself dying because it can't, especially while we're here in this physical realm. You see, the ego's job is really to protect us. Okay. And the problem is, though, is that protection often is misconstrued, misdirected, misguided because we're not being managed. We're not managing the ego well, right? We're not being mindful about the management of the ego. We jump from not recognizing what the ego is. That causes a lot of suffering. To wanting to just straight up kill the ego. Okay, which is just ridiculous and causes more suffering because you can't kill the ego. So when we think about the ego, I want you to think in terms of protection. Think of in terms of the over protective parent. Okay, that's what essentially the ego can be looked at as. You can relate it to that parent that wants to keep you, inside, that doesn't want you to go out with friends, that doesn't want you to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend because they are concerned about certain consequences or particular results. And that is what you want to be mindful of when it comes to the ego. So when we talk about ego death, the ego has experience or layers of the process of death, right? Because remember, when I talk about your future self, we're talking about phasing from one version of self to another. This version of you, it can be your past, right? Your past version. All right. This version can be the future version of you. This version can be the current version of you. Now, who you were in the past is different from who you are now, though you can still identify, right? You have your consciousness, you have a sense of identity, right? Sometimes that identity is based on the past. Sometimes you've let go of the past. Sometimes that identity is based on the future, which is what I teach in the future self frequency. So that way you bring your desired future self to the present. But ultimately, identity is what creates reality. Now, when we are shifted from these versions of self, we are essentially shedding aspects of the ego. That is what the shift really means. It means that we are shedding the ego and we are becoming closer with consciousness. These things are happening simultaneously. And so even if you are somebody who isn't spiritually aware and you're going through life and you're just roaming through life and, you're just sitting and watching, TV videos, you're not doing anything, you're just playing video games, believe it or not, you're still going through this process of evolution. You're still going through this process of shedding the ego or layers of the ego, right? Meaning you're not identifying with the suffering that the ego can create when it's not managed. You're not identifying with the physical self as who you truly are, but you are more identified with consciousness. So that is happening through the progression of life, existence here on this planet Earth, in this physical realm. Now, ego, right, represents this other side of your spiritual self. So consciousness is infinite, right? Ego is finite and represents all finite things. Consciousness can be looked at as light, ego, darkness. Okay? Consciousness can be looked at as joy, ego, suffering. Now, I've established to you already, we can go another one. We can do another one, which is very important. Consciousness is timeless, okay? Ego is time. I'm sure there's a better word that I can use outside of timeless, but you know what I am saying, right? Now, remember, you need one to acknowledge the other. You need light to acknowledge darkness. You need darkness to acknowledge light. In order for you, even though, in the spiritual community, we always want to identify with joy. We always want joy. We want happiness. We want peace. We want love. We want all these things. And the issue is, though, is that in order for you to understand and really harmonize with joy, you must recognize and make amends or come to a deep understanding of suffering and what that is. You see, suffering, darkness, time, are all aspects of the ego. These are all physical attributes. Right? These are all physical attributes, whereas joy, light, timelessness are all spiritual. So while we are here playing this game called life, you must understand that you are living in two realities simultaneously. This is why life can feel a little bit tough or confusing. When you are identifying with the ego, you are identifying with time. You feel like there's a lot of pressure and there's not enough time. You feel like you've wasted a lot of time, that there is no more time, right? That if you want to make a shift in your life, then it's a waste of time. It's too late. You're identifying with the physical body. You're somebody who is highly vain, thinking that, your body is essentially who you are, things of that nature. Darkness is a big talking point for you. You feel like the world is in a space of darkness. You feel like life is dark. You feel like life is hard, right? That's your conversation. Suffering is a byproduct of all these things. Now, here's the beauty of it, though. Suffering, even when you get into Buddhist teachings, Buddha said that we're made to suffer, okay? Suffering is a mechanism once harnessed well and really on this like mindful spiritual, journey, you start to recognize that suffering is a key to recognizing joy, right? Because again, it's not about picking whether you're going to identify with ego or consciousness, is recognizing the balance between the two, especially here, right? So when you recognize this line between each one of these things and all things, you no longer identify with the suffering or the joy. You no longer identify with the darkness or the light, or the physical or the spiritual, or the time or the timelessness. You identify with it all. That is when we get into oneness. All things are one. So when you recognize that, then you start to absolutely experience peace, tranquility, enlightenment. All right. So what I want to do is I'm going to share with you some ways to recognize ego death, or rather transcendence. Okay. Because it's not so much about, again, the ego dying, but it's really you transcending, identifying with it. So one of the things that happens for many of us when you are at this point of shedding yourself of the past identity, right? Because we can all agree that ego has a lot to do with identity. So the one thing you start to feel is a sense of restlessness. You feel restlessness, even when life looks fine, even when things are looking good, even when things appear to be okay, right? And you probably saying to yourself, well, or to me, when does ever life feels or appears to be okay, right? But but you get my point. You essentially experience a sense of restlessness when you everything is going normal, okay? But you feel like something's not right. That's when you're beginning to shed a layer of your ego and get closer to consciousness, okay? And so another thing is you begin to question or outgrow relationships, particular relationships. This isn't really intentional, right? Sometimes you just notice that you haven't spoken to, your best friend in days, weeks, months. Next thing you know, you go like, hey, what happened? You run into them in some random place. You're like, hey, let's hang out again. You go hang out with them. You're like, this relationship is not the same. Something's off. I don't enjoy being with them or spending time with them. Okay. This can also happen in our romantic relationships, unfortunately, because it can be a bit awkward. You're with somebody, been with somebody for years, living with them, but then for some reason, you just cannot hold this space of being content in that relationship. And therefore, you have to recognize that something ain't right. Now, sometimes it takes a good conversation. Sometimes it takes just really being vulnerable and just mentioning it and talking about it that opens up a deeper understanding for that relationship, especially if you two are committed to being with one another. But still, the shift in your ego causes a shift in that relationship or in your relationships in general. You see? Now, another thing that happens, the third thing is your goals change. You may have had a goal to write this book, to start this business, to travel to this particular part of the world. Do all these things, spend years building that, researching, figuring it out. You may be even at the end of the whole journey and you're actually about to move forward in your final step. But it changes, right? Or you've actually achieved it and you feel empty, right? You feel like that was nothing, right? You feel like, what did I spend all this time and effort doing Meanwhile, I've achieved it, yet I feel empty. It's not like the goal itself was or wasn't what you expected. Yeah, it can be everything you expected. Beautiful place, beautiful environment, weather, community, people. But when you went to that place, you felt empty. You know, when you finally wrote that book, you felt a sense of emptiness. You finally built that business, you feel empty. Finally got into that relationship with the person you've been in love with for years, but you still feel empty. It's not because of the place. It's not because of the person. It's not because of the business. It's not because of the book. It's simply you transcended from the ego. Understanding that a lot of times the reason why these things shift and change is because they were more physically identified, right? So you essentially say, for example, the goals. If your goal is to create a business, maybe you identified with just the money, all right, rather than purpose. Okay. Maybe the relationship, it was superficial because, you thought the person was just simply attractive, but you realized that they weren't, or you didn't have a, intimate bond or connection. You see? So you start to see how the shift transformed from identifying with ego to identifying more with a spiritual, more purposed level of, existence or reality. Because again, you are stepping away from identifying with the ego as you go through each phase of life, through each moment of life, and identifying with consciousness, right? So ego is over here. This is kind of the direction we're moving into, and consciousness is here. This is the journey. Now, it don't always look like a straight line, by no means, but for the purpose of examples and showing you how you can think about it, then this is a bit, demonstration. Okay. So the ego is not the enemy. Okay. The ego, I often refer to it as, if you want to play baseball, you need a baseball. Okay. If you want to play basketball, you need a basketball. If you want to go bowling, you need a bowling ball. Okay. The ego is the instrument of this game called life. Now, how do you move through it? Right? How do you get past this feeling of shedding one's ego? Or really, it's a recognition of your mastery over the ego and how the ego is a tool versus something that is manipulating you. We often villainize the ego as this thing that, you got to get rid of it because it is the devil. No, if you master it, then you recognize it as, but if it has mastery over you, then it definitely appears to be so. So what you will do is you will begin to, one, you start to notice, right, what fits and what doesn't fit. Okay. What fits and what doesn't fit. So you start to ask your questions. You start to say, okay, what is going on? Where do I feel balanced? Where do I feel satisfied, happy, fulfilled? Where do I feel discomfort, confusion, anxiety? Where do I feel emptiness? Nothing. Okay. When you start to do that, then you start to gain a deeper understanding of your journey. You always have to practice self-awareness. You always have to practice asking yourself the questions. The second thing you want to do is to journal. Okay. You want to journal. You want to take note. You want to be mindful about what it is that you're doing. And you want to journal about the present moment, right? What you're feeling, but more importantly, the future self. Okay. You want to journal about where you're beginning to see the trajectory of your life. But you also want to make sure that this is coming from a place of consciousness. Okay. Not ego. Remember, these are the things that you're going to do as far as when you start to feel the shift, where the shift is, even though the shift is literally always happening, there are moments where you're going to spike. There are moments where things are going to feel a little bit off because you're going to make a massive leap energetically, you know, from one frequency, you're going to jump to another frequency. So these are things that you're going to do. And these things that you're going to do while you're going through this turmoil, so to speak, is you're going to intentionally align with your consciousness. All right. Remember, we are stepping away from ego to consciousness. Okay. That's the whole objective here. So you're going to journal, and then you can journal as your present self in the present moment about what it is that you're feeling. And then maybe a separate entry, a separate time of the day, you're going to journal as your future self. Okay. You're going to visualize your future self. You're going to journal to your future self if you want to, whatever it is that resonates with you. In my future self journal that you can get at the futureselffrequency.com, you have the opportunity to simply write to your future self and then write from your future self as your future self. Okay. Now, if you feel like writing in the present moment brings you more into the moment, then do that. And then ground yourself in visualizing what it is you truly desire from the level of consciousness, not from the level of ego. Remember, ego deals in wants, consciousness deals in desire. The difference is the wants are very superficial. They are related to the desire, but the desire is the actual thing that you wish to experience. You want $1 million, but you actually desire financial freedom or the ability to do what you want to when you want to. And that $1 million feels like that, brings you that feeling. Okay. You may want to be in a relationship with that person that you like, or, you feel like you have a crush on, but you actually desire to experience love and deep connection. Okay. Now, what you want to do is you want to begin to dissect and release old stories. This is a big one. The old stories are connected. This is you, present moment in the middle. This is the past. The old stories are back here. Okay. The old stories are keeping you from moving forward, right? Now, you have to move forward. That's just the way it is. But you really slow down the process when you are holding on to these old stories, when you are identifying with these old stories. And that's what the ego tends to do. Now, the crazy thing is the ego tends to hold on to the old stories. Why? Because it's familiar. And though there's trauma there, though there's limited belief systems there, though there's suffering and harm there, sometimes if your old stories are, based on the fear of creating something new or having a new experience, it will try to stop you from actually doing that, because here if you don't have faith in your future self and what it is that you're creating, then you basically question, you question, you doubt. And then that creates a space of questioning, doubting, and even believing that what's here in the future is going to be worse than the past. When you hold on to these old stories of the past that's based on trauma, it basically gives you the lens, so to speak, right? The lens by which you see life. And so you start to see life from this perspective. Therefore, when it comes to thinking about the future, you're thinking about it in terms of this reality, this perspective. You're thinking it's going to be just like this or even worse. And so that keeps you stuck, hesitating, right? Procrastinating from actually moving forward in life. So you have to let go of these old stories. You have to let go of the past. You have to recognize that the ego is not serving you. So when you start doing this and feeling this restlessness and this, unease and this desire to move on from different relationships, or you're not really connected with certain relationships or what have you, you got to recognize, the old stories. Okay. Because a lot of times, that the relationship is not good for you, but because of the old stories, you're thinking, well, this is all I have, and I may not have another relationship, right? Because you're scared of actually moving forward to create the desire that you have, which is an amazing, deep, connected relationship. And now you're just focusing on ego, where you just simply want to be with somebody, right? You just like, I just want to be with somebody. So I'm going to take the somebody that I know, even though they are not really providing me with the love and deep connection that I truly desire, because out of fear of a past experience. So you have to let go of those old stories, use them, reframe them. Okay. Some people say we can't change the past. Now, what we can do for certain is change our perception of the past, our perspective of the past. That is the key. Now, the final thing, when you're experiencing this shedding of the ego, this transformation, is to embody. What are you embodying? You're embodying your desired future self. That looks like something different for each of us, but it is the things you desire, the things you wonder about, the things um, wonder, curious about, whatever your passions are, but you are, feeling weird, ashamed, you don't want to share it. These are the things that are actually going to free you. And once you start pursuing living out these things, then you truly begin to free yourself of the limitations of the ego. And that only means embodying these things, right? Doing something every single day, something small, every single day that is connecting you to that future version of you. This future version of you, I use the word future self, but really what I'm talking about is your true self. Okay. This is the version of you that you are meant to be. This is your destiny here. But you have to choose it. That's the ironic thing about it. It's your destiny, but you must choose it. So I want you to choose it. And it doesn't take a lot. Like, it's not hard to shed one of the ego as far as the ego's grasp on you. Once you start doing these things, you start recognizing the ego and what it does and its place. Then you start managing the ego appropriately. These are ways of managing the ego. Okay. Once you start putting these in practice, these, for example, the embodiment practices, these small things eventually become huge. They become big. They become you. They become your way of life. They become the very thing that, people look at you and will say, wow, you do that all the time. You do that every day. How many of those have you done? People have on their bucket list, to write a book. They have on their bucket list to run a marathon. They have on a bucket list to travel to a foreign country. For me, I'm like, I want to do that multiple times. So I've written over 12 books, right? And I have about 20 in my head written down in notes like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. But I have to be mindful, right? And I have to be manageable about how I strategize those things. Traveling, like I've traveled to multiple countries, and my goal is to travel to many countries, and I'm strategizing that. I am actually journaling, right? Letting go of the old stories, journaling myself as a traveler, speaking about places that I have been as my future self, you see? And then you start to embody that. You start to gain ideas and insights as to what to do. I'm traveling here. This is what I need to do, right? These are the things, the information, the insight I need to look up. And that's all there is to it. So you're not getting rid of the ego. The ego is a part of the game. As long as you are here, you are playing the game. So recognize that the ego is not the enemy as much as, when we think about yin and yang, right? We think of one side as the ally and the other side as the enemy, right? So we think of consciousness as the ally. We naturally want to think of the ego as the enemy. Well, remember that both aspects are you. Simple. So many times when we think about the enemy, we're really talking about the enemy. Okay. Now, that inner you is just simply misguided, uneducated, misaligned, right? And all you have to do is align. All you have to do is align with the big picture of reality, the big picture of who you are, of your life. Connect deeply with all aspects of you, not just the light. Okay? Connect with the light and the darkness. When you master that, then you master life. Why? Because you are mastering yourself. That's the key. That's the key to all of this. So as you begin to make this shift, this isn't about saying eventually you will not be ego or you will not have an ego, but this is just simply saying that you are less identified with ego here than you were here. The ego will always still be, but you are at a state of balance, okay? You are in a state of balance between the ego and your consciousness. And that's it. That's all I'm saying. So essentially, that is the true essence of what we often call the ego death. But it's really more like an ego transformation, transcendence, ascendance, by way of recognizing what the ego is and thus using that because that is who you are, a part of who you are in this physical reality. All right. Let me know in the comment section below if that helps you to understand ego death in a way that's way more productive, way more empowering, right? Because the idea that goes around about the ego death it's really not a good one, right? Because you know, no matter what techniques you try, and the reality is those people who claim they have achieved this sense of, letting go of their ego, they're the most boring people on the planet. They have no personality, no style, no sense of humor, wonder, and joy. That says something. And so we need to understand that, okay, if all of us are born with this thing, then it can't be something wrong with it. It's just part of, like I said, the game of life. And in order for you to get good at any game, you just simply have to learn how to manage, play, develop the skills of using that tool. And in our case, the tool is called ego, consciousness. All right. In order to play baseball, you need a ball, you need a bat. In order to play basketball, you need a ball, you need a basketball court, you need a hoop. Right? So you can look at those two things as an example of ego and consciousness. I hope that helps. Feel free to go to futureselffrequency.com to purchase the book and the journal. You can also go to drabundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, and I will give you a free copy of this Future Self Frequency Essence Edition, plus the first chapter of the Deluxe Transformation Edition. Thank you once again. Peace and abundance always.